more than any political policy, there is a need for a change of ethos, one which honors the virtues of honor itself, of sacrifice, of gratitude, to replace those current obsessions with individual assertion, selfishness, and pride.
Hello there. I've been watching a lot of the videos from the National Conservative Conference that took place last week. This was the conference where one of the keynote speakers was Tucker Carlson. He did a very good speech there, but I wanted to make a video about another speech. Specifically, I want to focus on the speech that Patrick Deneen gave. For those of you unfamiliar with Patrick Deneen, he is a political scientist and college professor who wrote the book Why Liberalism Failed. Why Liberalism Failed is a great book. It's not very long. It's not hard to read. It serves as a good general outline to a lot of the rot and problems that we have in the United States today, and explains why they are connected to and caused by liberalism. Now, during this video, I'm going to play parts of Patrick Deneen's speech to the National Conservative Conference, and I'm going to help explain some of his ideas.
Nationalism as an ism in American history, and especially as pronounced during the Progressive period, during the reign of Woodrow Wilson, the prominence of Theodore Roosevelt. This earlier rise of nationalism in America was not the project of conservatives, but promoted especially by self-described progressives. And I think what we have to stress is that the emphasis of this project was the explicit and desired, and indeed in many ways successful aim to weaken more local, regional, neighborhood, and particular forms of identity within the nation. That identification that had been the hallmark of much of the American political, cultural experience.
Until recently, with the election of Donald Trump, you didn't hear conservatives refer to them as nationalists. And in fact, when Trump uses the term to describe his political philosophy, he's doing it as a contrast to people he perceives to be, fairly or not, as globalist. Trump says that he will put America first, which means that his foreign policy will be based on boosting American citizens, as opposed to helping out other countries. Now, when Patrick Deneen criticizes nationalism during this conference, he's not talking about opposition to Donald Trump's nationalism. Patrick Deneen is not a globalist. He's, in fact, the opposite of that. What Patrick Deneen believes is that the most important parts of government are state and local, that the emphasis on improving people's lives should start with local communities, cities, towns, things like that. Patrick Deneen believes that by nationalizing so much in our country, it has diminished local culture and character. Now, you can think of historical cities in America like New Orleans, New York City, or Charleston, South Carolina, and those cities would be very different from each other. They would have very different architecture, they would have very different food, they would have entirely different cultures. All three of these cities I've named are great places to visit, and you can certainly learn about their unique history if you visit any one of these cities. However, if you were to go out to the suburbs of any one of these cities, you would find that they look pretty similar. In the suburbs of New Orleans, New York City, or Charleston, South Carolina, you're going to notice that they have a lot of the same stores, a lot of the same food, and a lot of the same culture. As Patrick Deneen writes in his book, the reason why this is the case is that over time in American society, our liberalism has ended up destroying our culture. This has led to the phenomenon where America as a nation, no matter what state you visit, no matter where you go, anywhere that is in a historical city is going to look very similar to any other part of the country. The great local character that a place like New Orleans or New York City has simply does not exist in the vast majority of parts in the United States. It becomes very hard to truly care about your community and want to contribute to it when it's just an interchangeable series of parking lots and corporate big box stores.
Theodore Roosevelt, whose name was invoked yesterday as at least one of the guiding lights of this new national conservatism, and I think we should be wary of that, stated in his important 1910 speech, The New Nationalism, that, and I quote, "The new nationalism puts the national need before the sectional or personal advantage," and went on to then argue that local government should cede its activities to national government. This refrain is found throughout the writings of the progressives of this period, the need to move the loyalties and identities of Americans from their local places and their people whom they live closely with to a more abstract devotion to the nation and its ideals. If the aim of liberal philosophy, and especially progressive liberal philosophy today, is to transcend our local parochialisms, our particular identities, the places and people to whom we have particular commitments, those cultures and traditions located in histories and in places, then ultimately the nation will become understood as itself too confining and too limiting and too parochial. We will need to amend the progressive motto, in the nation's service, to in the service of all nations, and then to the service of humanity, and then to the globe and the cosmos and the entire created order.
What Patrick Dineen is talking about here is this idea that the original progressives, people like Teddy Roosevelt, emphasized nationalism in a way to help build an American empire. This was done at the expense of local communities, which were de-emphasized in favor of emphasizing the larger nation. Over time, these progressives, who were the original nationalists, ended up evolving into their modern-day left-wing progressive counterparts. These modern progressives changed their emphasis from the nation and focused it towards the entire planet. This is why the modern left is so committed to globalism. This is why the Democrats are the party of Wall Street and globalist corporations. This is also why the left has become the more interventionist, the more pro-war party when compared to the Republican Party.
It is especially in the light of recent efforts of today's progressives, the inheritors of the nationalism of Wilson, Roosevelt, and Crowley, to transcend the nation, to aspire to membership in the cosmopolis, that it seems natural for conservatives to rally around the ideal of a national community. But we should always be wary of simply occupying the ground recently vacated by progressives as the natural place for conservatives to rest.
What Patrick Deneen points out here is that it makes sense for conservatives as an opposition to progressives to take up the cause of nationalism, but what they really should be doing is being even more radical than that. They should emphasize localism. I believe that Patrick Deneen would also agree with the idea that a focus on localism is more in line with what the founding fathers envisioned America. We were supposed to be a federalist country where not every single city and state was exactly the same. The idea was that American cities could govern themselves and experiment with different types of government policies. In modern America, though, that doesn't really appear to be happening. There are several causes for this. I would say first and foremost is the huge amount of power that huge global corporations wield over towns and communities in the United States. Another big problem is the liberal individual rights-based court system that we have in the United States, which is constantly micromanaging what state and local governments are allowed to do. States can't experiment with different types of social policies without getting bench slapped from some U.S. district court judge because they violated some right of some company. So instead we get this globalized, homogenized version of America where everywhere is the same no matter where you go. And it's completely contrary to what was envisioned by our Constitution. Our government's liberalism, instead of giving us more freedom to live in the types of places that we would want to live, has in fact created the opposite scenario. Our individual rights have narrowed our options. Our choices now are to live in cities that are exactly the same.
In part so that at least we can more visibly discern what is the object and aim of this political project. What is it that we wish to conserve? Many speakers over these last days, and especially J.D. And Mary Eberstadt, have spoken eloquently about the need to shore up the family, the absolutely disintegrating family in America, to assist the working person, the people with less advantages than those of us who live and often work in places like the nation's capital, of shoring up or at least not attacking the churches and the synagogues, of assisting the capacity of people to live in stable and decent neighborhoods. And conservatism should be about nothing less. How do we conserve the elements of what we all understand to be a flourishing life, and what we know since time immemorial, that a flourishing life depends upon a deep and stable network of people of mutual care and commitment and sacrifice.
Patrick Deneen believes our extreme liberalism, our obsession with global capitalism, has led to a breakdown in the American family and has led to the erosion of social capital. In the past, when people dealt with crises or problems in their lives, they had a lot of intermediary organizations and other people who they could rely upon. As members of a church or synagogue, they could reach out to other people for help. Back then, it was expected that Americans would actually have knowledge of what was going on in their local government and that local government would be responsive to local problems. These days, most Americans are so overworked, so overwhelmed that they have no idea, no time, patience, or energy to participate in their local governments. Local governments have increasingly been captured by special interests, which a lot of times would include the globalist corporations, and serve their needs instead of the needs of its local citizens. The founding fathers wanted America to be a republic where each person was a citizen that participated in the republic, that people would vote in elections and be knowledgeable about things such as state and local politics. But these days, the average American has no idea what is going on in his state and local government. Instead, our education system these days works on preparing people for a life of work for a globalist capitalist company. Instead of spending their days as a citizen of a republic serving their state and local government, average Americans instead end up working like slaves for global corporations. This is a bastardization of the vision that the founding fathers had of America.
The nation, as conceived certainly by progressives, has at times, and too often in American history, been embraced from a stance of hostility to the local and the communal and the particular, and yes, even the family. But the irony is that the destruction that has been wrought by an earlier nationalism today needs to be corrected by an embrace of a new kind of understanding of the nation that assists the parts, the nation that supports people where they are, in their neighborhoods and communities and families.
What Patrick Dineen is proposing is rebuilding the concept of community in America. Instead of focusing so much on making money for corporations, why don't we try and prop up towns and cities? We should have towns and cities that have actual, real, authentic local cultures. We badly need to regain the social capital that Americans used to enjoy but has been completely lost in our recent hyper-liberal, hyper-capitalist society.
We've seen this especially devastated in our communities today of those living at the margins of our society. The working class, whether it's white, African American, Hispanic, and otherwise. The broken families, the absence of social capital, the decimation of community. We know that the best indicator of a flourishing life as a healthy and intact family is coming from such a family. And we can perhaps even agree with Hillary Clinton that it takes a village, if we mean a village, a community, an actual village to support families in raising children. But in America today, the ability to raise flourishing children is now a luxury good, maybe the ultimate luxury good. Today's progressives decry the deplorables even as they monopolize not just the capital, but more importantly, the social capital. And libertarians promote a globalized economic order without attending sufficiently to its effects upon the life prospects, especially of those who struggle among the working class. A national conservatism in part asks the question then, what can the nation do to support the objects and aims that conservatives care about? And we can and should begin with Tucker Carlson's proposal yesterday. If you want to raise your children, what are the policies and programs that will make it possible for you to do so? What kind of economic policies along the lines that we heard last night from Orrin Cass can support the widespread opportunity for good work throughout our nation so that those seeking decent jobs to raise their families don't all have to move to Washington, D.C.? What kinds of emphases in support of our education system will make it more likely that our most talented young people don't all have to become deracinated, placeless, commitmentless cogs and widgets on their path to the dreams of becoming a consultant?
A big problem that our current society has, according to both Patrick Deneen, but it's also discussed in Charles Murray's book, Coming Apart, is this idea of deracinization. In the US, we now have people take proxy IQ tests such as the SAT, and the best students who score the highest on these tests end up separating from their local communities and get hauled off to elite colleges where they then go and work for companies in wealthy enclaves like Silicon Valley or, for example, San Francisco or New York City. The local communities are robbed of their most talented people. All of the brilliant people who grew up in these towns and cities end up leaving. And what ends up happening is the towns that aren't these wealthy enclaves end up rotting from the inside. Social problems such as drug addiction and crime ends up enveloping these areas and traps generations into a miserable existence. This is the opposite of the type of freedom that the founding fathers would have envisioned for our country.
The rise of progressive nationalism was also marked by the rise of a belief that the nation could be the vehicle for the creation of the kingdom of God on earth, a new and ersatz religion, and launched us today into the strange time in which those who most vehemently declare their hostility to religion are themselves the most dogmatic, the most judgmental, and the most fanatic among us.
In this part of the video, Patrick Dineen discusses the fact that modern-day progressivism has become like a religion. This is why the news media, for example, treats Donald Trump as some sort of blasphemer. The modern progressive journalist is nothing more than a shrill moral busybody. They are constantly judging people who don't follow the precepts of social justice and globalism. Furthermore, these modern-day progressives constantly proselytize and try and convert organizations and individuals to conform with their ideology. This has become the basis for the culture war. Modern-day progressives have sought to destroy every aspect of our culture and replace it with a version where individuals have unlimited choices. Any cultural product, according to these modern-day progressives, has to be appealing to every single demographic. You cannot have a gendered toy. It's why people who have drunk the Kool-Aid, like extra credits, absolutely lose their shit when a video game has a possibility that they're going to have to play as the Nazi party in a multiplayer match. These modern day progressives would rather erase our culture and history and replace it with something different, something globalized and homogenized. You see this phenomena take place when in World War II games now we have black females fighting as part of the German army, even though that doesn't make sense culturally and doesn't make sense historically. That's about all I have to say in this video. I'm going to include a link to the entire speech that Patrick Dineen gives, and I encourage you to watch it. If you like this video and you don't already subscribe to this channel, please subscribe.